Hi, Laura. Okay, I'm going to be reading it. Who is Jane Goodall? Remember, you can pause this at any time. You can stop it. You can rewind it. You can fast forward it. I just wanted to make sure you had a copy of this where you could hear. So I'm going to be reading it. Again, stop it, pause it, start it whenever you want. Okay? So who is Jane Goodall? Also, I'm not going to be showing it while I'm reading because all the words are backwards, so I will show the page before I start. So right now we are on page 1. Who is Jane Goodall? When Jane Goodall was a little more than a year old, her father gave her a toy animal. It wasn't a soft and cuddly puppy or kitten or bunny. It was a big chimpanzee. Why did Jane's father choose a chimp? It was 1935. A baby chimpanzee had been born at the London Zoo. Jane's parents lived in London and followed the news about the little chimp named Jubilee. Why was it such a big event? Before then, all the zoo's chimps had been born in the wild in Africa. Jane's toy chimp was named Jubilee, too. Right, we are now on page 2-3. It played music when Jane squeezed its belly. Because Jubilee was so real-looking, some people thought that the chimp was too scary for a baby girl. Jubilee might give little Jane bad dreams. But they were wrong. Jane loved Jubilee and took the toy wherever she went. As a very young child, Jane Goodall had no idea that she would spend most of her life among chimpanzees. Real live chimpanzees. But that's what she did. The chimps that Jane came to know did not live in a zoo. They roamed free in the forests of eastern Africa. Over time, the chimps began to treat Jane like just another chimp, a tall, funny-looking white chimp. Because the chimps accepted her, Jane Goodall was able to learn more about these amazing animals than anybody had before. She saw how chimp mothers cared for their babies. She saw how chimps worked and played together. She learned how chimps showed happiness, fear, anger, and sadness. Most important of all, Jane Goodall proved to the world how alike humans and chimpanzees are. As for Jubilee, the toy chimp, Jane never gave it away. To this day, Jubilee sits on a dresser in the house where Jane lives. Are chimpanzees monkeys? No. Most little children will look at a picture of a chimpanzee and say it's a monkey. But chimps are not monkeys. Chimps are apes. So are gorillas and orangutans. Apes do not have tails. Almost all kinds of monkeys do. Apes have strong arms and can swing from tree branch to tree branch. Most monkeys can't do this. They run along the tops of branches. Ape skeletons look very much like human skeletons. Monkey skeletons look much more like the skeletons of dogs, cats, and other small animals. Monkeys, apes, and humans all belong to the animal group called primates. Apes are our closest relatives in the animal kingdom. All right, we're on chapter 1. Jane Goodall was born on April 3rd, 1934, in London, England. London is one of the world's greatest cities. Jane, however, was far happier in the country. She liked being outdoors, exploring nature. Her family moved outside the city to a house with a yard. What interested her most were animals. All kinds of animals. Learning about them in books was interesting, but facts from books were not enough for Jane. Jane wanted to find out about animals by watching them herself. One time she dug up some earthworms. She came home and put them under her pillow. Jane wanted to go to sleep with them. Her mother explained that the worms needed to be in their own homes. Little Jane was disappointed, but returned the worms to the garden. When she was about 5, Jane was curious to see how chickens laid eggs. In the backyard at her grandmother's house was a chicken coop. Here was Jane's chance to watch an egg get laid. She had Jubilee with her. She crept into the empty chicken coop. Then she waited for a hen to arrive. Jen stayed so still that the hen didn't notice her. Hour after hour went by. Jane kept waiting and watching. Finally, after 5 hours, Jane saw what she had hoped for. Out popped an egg from underneath the chicken. Jane was excited. We're on page 10. Her family, however, was scared. Her mother had called the police to report that Jane was missing, but when Jane returned to the house, she did not get a scolding. Her mother understood that Jane was not being naughty. She needed to learn about the natural world in her own special way. Jane's mother was called Vaughn. She wrote novels. Jane's father, Mortimer, was an engineer who later became a race car driver. On Jane's 4th birthday, her sister, Judy, was born. Imagine sharing the same birthday as your sister or brother. Page 12. The Goodall girls were young when World War II broke out in 1939. Adolf Hitler was the Nazi leader of Germany and Austria. He was trying to seize control of all of Europe, including England. Right before the war, Jane's family was living in France. Her father was racing cars there. However, once the war started, the family returned to England. Mortimer joined the British Army in the fight against the Nazis. Vaughn and her 2 young daughters moved in with Vaughn's mother, who lived in the seaside town of Bournemouth. A little more than 100 miles from London, Bournemouth was safer than living in London, which the Germans started bombing in September of 1940. On this page. In German, Blitzkrieg means lightning war. The term is used for surprise attacks from the air. On September 7, 1940, German planes flew over London and dropped bombs on the city. The attacks lasted for more than 8 months. It was a frightening time. Often the raids happened at night. Often there was little or no warning before the bombing started. People would run and hide underground in subway stations. When the bombing stopped, they'd return to the streets and see rubble where buildings had stood only minutes before. About 30,000 people died because of the bombings. Another 50,000 were injured. Even so, the British never surrendered to the Germans. The war ended in Europe in the spring of 1945 with Germany's defeat. The Goodall's first home in London remained standing. However, more than 1 million buildings had been destroyed. It took decades to rebuild London. Page 16. In 1943, Vaughn and her daughters moved into their own home in Bournemouth. Jane spent the rest of her childhood there. Jane was 8 at the time. By then, Mortimer was living apart from his wife and daughters. Jane was most happy when she was outdoors with a neighborhood dog named Rusty. She started a nature club with her sister and 2 friends. Jane had lots of rules for the club. Jane, of course, was the leader. Members had to be able to identify all sorts of different animals. Each member had a code name. The club was fun and interesting, but Jane's friends thought sometimes she was too bossy. Jane also loved reading books about animals. The Story of Dr. Dolittle by Hugh Lofting was one of her favorites. Dr. Dolittle went to Africa and was able to talk to wild animals. Jane understood that she would never be able to carry on a conversation with a tiger or giraffe or monkey, but she knew it was possible to live in Africa close to wild animals. By the time she was 10, she had decided that's exactly what she was going to do with her life. By 1952, Jane's parents were divorced. She didn't ever lose touch with her father, but she was never close to him the way she was close with Vaughn. On this page. Tarzan the Jungle Hero. Tarzan, a human raised by apes in the African jungle, was the hero of best-selling novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs. The first book, Tarzan of the Apes, was published in 1914. The first Tarzan movie appeared in 1918, before there were talkies. Since then, there have been almost 90 movies made about the adventures of Tarzan. The most popular ones came out in the 1930s and 1940s. They starred Johnny Weissmuller, the former Olympic swimmer. Tarzan's best friend was a chimp named Cheetah, and his girlfriend was named Jane. Jane Goodall has said that the Tarzan movies made a big impression on her. Tarzan was living her dream life. Jane was graduating from high school. Although she had been a very good student, there was not enough money for college. So Jane moved to London and took a job as a secretary. The city was a thrilling place to live. However, Jane told her mother and grandmother that her work was dull. It made her miserable. Through a friend, she found a job at a company that made documentary films. That was much more interesting. Page 20. Still, Jane never stopped dreaming of Africa, to live there and find work studying animals in their natural homes. The odds were not in Jane's favor. First of all, in the 1950s, scientists studied animals in zoos or labs, not in the wild. Animal scientists had years of education. Jane Goodall had no college degree, and at the time, even women with degrees were limited in their career choices. Most became teachers or went into nursing. So how would Jane find a way to live the life she longed for? Chapter 2, An Invitation. In 1956, a letter came that changed Jane Goodall's life. It was from an old school friend named Chloe. Chloe's family had bought a farm in Kenya, Africa. Chloe wanted Jane to visit. Did Jane think twice about going? Of course not. We're on page 22. Traveling to Africa was expensive. Living in London was expensive too. So Jane moved back home with her mother in Bournemouth. She saved up money for the trip by working as a waitress. Jane was a very good waitress. She could carry as many as 13 plates balanced on her arms. On March 13, 1957, Jane's African adventure began. She was turning 23. In England, she boarded a ship that arrived in Kenya 3 weeks later. From the city of Mombasa, she took a train inland. It was April 3rd, her birthday. After a long drive on dirt roads, Jane reached the farm in time for dinner and birthday cake. 24-25. That very first day, Jane saw a giraffe. It wasn't in a cage, it was running by the side of a road. She could hardly believe it. What a terrific birthday present that was. Jane knew that she couldn't stay at the farm for more than a few weeks. She was a guest after all. She didn't want to overstay her welcome. What she needed was a job that would keep her in Africa. Jane was in luck. At a party, she met someone who arranged a meeting between Jane and the famous scientist Louis Leakey. He and his wife Mary were British citizens, but Kenya was their home. Louis Leakey. Louis Leakey was born in August 1903 in Kenya. His parents had been born in Great Britain. They went to Africa to teach the Christian religion to the Kikuyu tribe. Louis's very first home was in a tiny hut with a dirt floor. The roof was made of thatch and leaked. Growing up, he felt much more African than British. His friends were all Africans, and when he was a teenager, the Kikuyu people honored him with membership in their tribe. At 13, Louis found some stone tools made by early humans. This discovery sparked a lifelong career studying the origins of human beings. Along with his second wife, Mary Leakey, he hunted for fossils of human ancestors. The Leakeys worked in an area called Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. At the time, the country was called